I never thought a simple evening at my friend's house would change the way I saw everything, until his mother leaned in, her eyes steady on mine, and whispered, "You're more dangerous than you realize." I still remember that late afternoon as clearly as if it happened yesterday. I had dropped by my best friend's house, expecting the usual routine, a laugh, a video game, maybe some aimless chatter to pass the time. The kind of easy, forgettable evening you don't expect to hold any weight. But instead, when I rang the bell, it wasn't my friend who opened the door. It was his mother. She stood framed in the doorway, the low sunlight falling across her like it had been waiting for her all day. There was nothing overly dramatic in her appearance, no perfect dress or staged elegance, but something about the way she carried herself made the moment pause. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands brushing against her cheek. She wore a simple sweater, sleeves pushed to her elbows, but even that looked graceful on her. "Come in," she said warmly, stepping aside. Her voice carried a calm assurance that instantly shifted the atmosphere. I stepped inside, expecting to see my friend somewhere nearby, but the house was quiet, almost too quiet. "He's out for a bit," she explained, closing the door gently behind me. "Should be back soon." That should have been all. I should have sat down, pulled out my phone, waited in silence until he arrived. But instead I followed her into the kitchen. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe politeness, maybe something else I couldn't yet name. The kitchen was filled with the faint scent of coffee and lemon, the kind of homely fragrance that felt comforting but unfamiliar in a way that made me hyper-aware of everything. The sunlight caught the edges of the counter, the polished surfaces reflecting soft gold. She was moving easily around the space, rinsing a cup, drying her hands on a towel, the simple rhythms of her day continuing as if I wasn't disrupting them. But my eyes kept finding her. The small tilt of her head when she listened, the way she brushed a stray strand of hair behind her ear, the soft crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled politely at something I said. We started with small talk. The usual questions: how I was, what I'd been doing lately, how school or work was going. But the way she asked made me feel like she genuinely cared about the answer, like she wasn't just filling the silence. And that, strangely, made me speak with more honesty than I usually did. For the first time, I noticed things I hadn't before. The steadiness in her gaze, the way her presence filled the quiet without ever demanding attention. It wasn't the nervous flutter I associated with attraction. It was something heavier, something that rooted itself quietly inside me, leaving me aware of every word, every pause, every glance that lingered just a little too long. I sat at the edge of one of the kitchen stools, not quite sure if I should make myself comfortable. The house was so still that even the faint hum of the refrigerator sounded louder than usual. She moved gracefully, pouring hot water into a teacup, the steam curling between us in delicate wisps. "Would you like something?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. Her voice had a softness to it, a tone that carried warmth without effort. I shook my head at first, but she poured a second cup anyway, sliding it toward me across the counter. The porcelain was warm against my palms, and for some reason, the simple gesture felt strangely personal, as though she was sharing more than just tea. What started as casual conversation stretched far longer than I expected. She asked about my plans, what I wanted to do with my life, whether I felt certain or lost. Most people my age dreaded those kinds of questions, but with her, it didn't feel like an interrogation. She wasn't measuring me against some invisible standard, she was genuinely curious. I found myself speaking more honestly than I intended. I admitted that sometimes I felt directionless, that I wasn't sure where I was supposed to end up. She listened without interruption, her chin resting lightly against her hand, her eyes never drifting away as though my words mattered more than I realized. There was something steadying in the way she looked at me. Most people let their attention wander, nodding absently as you spoke. But her gaze held me in place, pulling more out of me than I thought I'd share. When she laughed, it was quiet and low, a sound that seemed to linger in the room even after it faded. "You're harder on yourself than you need to be," she said. "You've got more presence than you realize. People notice." Her words caught me off guard. I wanted to brush them off, to downplay them, but the sincerity in her tone made it impossible. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she reached across the counter and touched my arm. It was brief, just her fingertips pressing gently against my sleeve, a reassuring gesture. But the warmth of that touch ran deeper than it should have. My pulse quickened, though I tried to remain still, tried not to let the moment show on my face. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. At least I told myself that. It was kindness, reassurance, maybe even motherly in some distant sense. But beneath the surface, it carried something unspoken, something that lingered long after she pulled her hand away. The kitchen light seemed softer then, as though the room itself leaned closer around us. The tea had grown cool in my cup untouched, but I didn't care. All that mattered in that moment was the quiet pull of her presence, and the way every word, every glance, every small gesture seemed to mean more than it should. It happened so suddenly, yet so quietly, that I almost didn't notice the moment until it was already inside me. She had moved closer, reaching across the narrow kitchen space to hand me a glass of water. It should have been an ordinary exchange, something so routine it would disappear into memory without leaving a trace. But the kitchen wasn't wide, and when she stepped into that sliver of space between us, the air shifted. For the briefest second, our shoulders brushed. The faint fabric of her sleeve grazed mine, and though the contact was light, my body reacted like it was more. I could hear the soft hitch in my own breathing, the awareness of her so close I could catch the delicate scent of her perfume, something floral, but muted, like jasmine carried on night air. I glanced at her, and for the first time, I saw hesitation flicker in her. She paused with the glass still in her hand, eyes darting toward mine. It wasn't deliberate. It was quick, unguarded, but it left me wondering what she had almost said, or almost done, in that silence. She smiled faintly, but it was a restrained kind of smile, like she was aware of the weight of the moment. I reached for the glass, careful not to let my hand touch hers, but even the nearness of it made the space feel charged. And then, she leaned in. Not much. Just a subtle tilt, as though she was going to say something private, something not meant for anyone else. Her hair fell slightly forward, brushing against her cheek, and when she spoke, her voice dropped into something softer, lower. "You're more dangerous than you realize." The words weren't playful. They weren't scolding either. They carried a weight that settled deep in my chest. I froze, unsure of what she meant, unsure if she meant it the way I heard it. Dangerous. The word echoed inside me, tangled with 1,000 possibilities. Dangerous because I was too close. Dangerous because of how I was looking at her. Or dangerous because she felt something too, and admitting it out loud would make it real. I tried to laugh it off, a nervous, awkward sound that fell flat in the stillness. But she didn't laugh. She just looked at me for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, her lips pressed together, as if she'd already said too much. Then, just as quickly, she stepped back, putting a few feet of distance between us. The kitchen returned to normal. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. But nothing felt normal anymore. I held the glass in my hand, not even drinking from it, just staring at the water trembling slightly against the rim. Her words kept circling, refusing to settle. Her words didn't leave me. Even as she stepped back into the rhythm of her evening, moving about the kitchen as if nothing had shifted, I sat there with my heart beating too hard against my chest. "You're more dangerous than you realize." The sentence looped in my mind, circling like a bird that refused to land. I wanted to ask her what she meant. I wanted to laugh it off, to bring lightness back into the air. But instead I stayed quiet. And maybe that silence said more than either of us intended. The house, once familiar, felt different now. Every sound seemed sharper, every pause heavier. I could hear the steady ticking of the clock in the living room, each second stretching like it was marking the distance between us. The refrigerator's hum filled the space like a faint background note, but beneath it all was something unspoken, something living in the gap between us. I caught myself watching her more closely than I ever had before. The way her fingers lingered an extra moment on the rim of the teacup. the way her smile flickered, as if she was keeping it in place by sheer will. And most of all, the way her eyes softened every time they landed on me, only to dart away just as quickly, as if she knew she had lingered too long. I shifted in my chair, restless, not because I wanted to leave, but because I suddenly didn't know how to sit still in this new reality. There was a weight pressing against me, invisible but undeniable. It wasn't just attraction. It was recognition. A realization that whatever existed in that silence between us had been waiting, unnoticed, until now. She asked me a simple question about work, her tone steady, but I could hear the quiet strain underneath, as though she too was fighting to keep things ordinary. I answered, but the words felt clumsy, distracted. My mind wasn't on the subject anymore. It was on the closeness we'd shared moments earlier. On the hushed tone of her voice when she leaned in. On the way those words had felt like both a boundary and a confession. Every time our eyes met, it was brief, too brief, like we were both afraid of letting the moment stretch too far. And yet, even those fleeting glances carried a weight that left my chest tight. I realized then that silence could be louder than words. That the spaces between what we say often reveal more than the sentences themselves. When she moved past me to set a plate on the counter, her sleeve brushed lightly against my shoulder again. Just a passing contact, nothing deliberate. But my body reacted as if it mattered, as if the entire air between us had shifted once more. I took a slow breath, steadying myself, though nothing inside me felt steady anymore. The silence wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything we weren't saying, everything we weren't supposed to admit. And yet, in that fullness, I felt something awaken in me, a pull I couldn't ignore, no matter how hard I tried. The hours had slipped by without me noticing. The daylight that had poured so freely through the kitchen window was gone, replaced by the gentle hush of evening. Lamps glowed in warm pools of light across the room, casting everything in softer tones. The world outside seemed to have retreated into stillness, leaving just the two of us inside this cocoon of quiet. She sat down across from me at the table, the teacups between us long empty. For the first time that day, she didn't seem busy, no dishes in her hands, no motion to distract her. Just her, seated with her shoulders slightly lowered, as if she'd finally let herself rest. "You know," she began softly, her voice almost hesitant. "Sometimes I wonder what people would see if I stopped holding everything together." Her words caught me off guard. She wasn't speaking to fill silence anymore. She was letting something go. I leaned forward slightly, giving her space to continue, though I didn't push. She glanced at her hands, tracing a circle along the rim of her empty cup. "People think I'm strong," she continued. "And maybe I am. But strength, it can get heavy. Some days I just want someone to notice that I'm tired too. That I don't always have the answers." The honesty in her voice struck me. I had always seen her as composed, in control, the kind of person who carried herself with effortless grace. But in that moment, I saw her differently, not weaker, but more real. And somehow, that truth made her presence even more magnetic. I found myself speaking without thinking. I think that's what makes you strong. Not pretending you're never tired. Not pretending you don't feel things." Her eyes lifted to meet mine then. They weren't guarded anymore. They were open, vulnerable, like she was letting me see something most people never did. "I don't usually talk about this," she admitted. "It's easier to keep it all in. But I don't know. With you, it feels different." The words landed in me like a quiet spark. I didn't deserve her trust, not really. But the fact that she was willing to share it left me wanting to protect it, to protect her. Before I could answer, she reached across the table. Her hand rested gently on mine, her touch light but certain. At first, it could have been a gesture of comfort, the way someone might reassure a friend. But the way her thumb lingered against my skin, slow, deliberate, made it feel like more. The warmth of her hand traveled up through my arm, steady but electrifying, and for a moment I couldn't find my voice. I just let it happen, let myself feel the simplicity of her touch. "Thank you for listening," she said quietly. I swallowed, nodding, though words felt too small for what was passing between us. In that dimly lit kitchen, with her hand resting on mine and her eyes holding mine steady, I realized this was no longer about waiting for my friend to return. This was about something else entirely, something neither of us had planned, but both of us felt. By the time we noticed the clock, night had fully settled outside. The windows reflected only the room back at us, the soft glow of the lamps, and the two of us still sitting too close, too wrapped in words and silences to remember the time. I should drive you home, she said at last, her tone gentle but firm, as though reminding herself of boundaries as much as me. I nodded, though something inside me resisted the idea of leaving. Still, I stood, and together we moved toward the front door. The house, once alive with small sounds of activity, felt quieter now, heavier. Each step seemed slower than it needed to be, as though either of us was ready to let the night end. At the doorway, she reached for my jacket hanging from the hook. She shook it out, then held it toward me with that same grace she carried in everything she did. I slipped my arms through the sleeves, but as I did, her fingers brushed against the back of my neck, light, accidental, maybe. But it didn't feel accidental. The touch was brief, yet it sent a current through me that was impossible to ignore. My breath caught, and I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her. She was close, closer than she needed to be. Her eyes lifted to mine, and in them I saw the same flicker I felt inside myself, that suspended hesitation, that unspoken question neither of us dared to voice. The space between us shrank without either of us moving. I could feel the warmth of her so near, smell the faint trace of her perfume mingling with the cool air drifting in from the cracked doorway. For a heartbeat, the rest of the world seemed to vanish. Her hand lingered on my collar, smoothing it gently as though fussing over something small, but it wasn't about the collar. It was about the excuse to stay close, to touch, to not pull away just yet. I wanted to speak. I wanted to say something that could break or save the moment. But the words didn't come. My voice was locked somewhere deep in my chest, trapped by the intensity of her gaze. We stood there, breathing the same air, suspended in a silence that felt as fragile as glass. If I leaned forward even an inch, if she let her hand fall against me instead of the fabric of my jacket, the line between us would vanish. But she didn't. She drew in a quiet breath, her eyes softening with something like regret and something like relief all at once. Then she stepped back, her hand falling away from my collar. "Get home safe," she whispered, her voice carrying the weight of all the things either of us would say. I nodded, my chest tight, my mind reeling. As I stepped out into the cool night, I could still feel the warmth of her touch against my skin, a ghost that refused to fade. The night air felt sharper than I expected as I stepped outside. The quiet of the street wrapped around me, the sound of crickets rising in the background. Her door closed softly behind me, but I still felt her presence as if she were standing just over my shoulder. I walked down the path slowly, my hands tucked into my jacket pockets, the collar still carrying the faint trace of her perfume. It was strange how something so subtle could feel so consuming. I could still hear her voice in my head, that whispered line that had changed everything. "You're more dangerous than you realize." I turned the words over and over as I made my way home. Dangerous, not because of anything I might do to her, but because of what she might feel if she let herself. Because of what I already felt, even if I didn't fully understand it. I hadn't crossed the line, and neither had she. But that didn't mean the boundary between us hadn't shifted. What had been a simple friendship, me and my best friend, me stopping by their house as casually as always, had become something layered, charged with meaning I couldn't ignore. The truth was, I saw her differently now. Not just as my friend's mom, not just as the graceful woman who had always hovered in the background of my visits. I saw her as someone human, layered, vulnerable. Someone who carried strength and weariness in equal measure. Someone who, in the quiet of that night, had let me glimpse her heart more closely than most people ever would. I knew we couldn't speak of it. I knew, too, that we might never share a moment like that again. But still, I felt changed. Her touch lingered in my memory, The light brush of her thumb against my hand at the table, the soft press of her fingers on my collar as she smoothed it, the warmth of her arm brushing mine in the kitchen. None of it had been scandalous. None of it had crossed into anything forbidden. And yet, those tiny gestures carried more weight than 100 louder ones could. I realized then that intimacy doesn't always need words, or kisses, or declarations. Sometimes it's in the pauses, the quiet moments when two people see each other clearly, without disguise. By the time I reached home, my chest ached with something bittersweet. I knew the world would see nothing unusual about my evening. To anyone else, it was just a night spent waiting for a friend. But to me, it was something more. It was the night her eyes lingered a moment too long. The night her voice dropped into a whisper that would echo in me for years. The night I understood what it meant to be seen, fully, deeply, by someone I never expected. And as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling in the darkness, I realized something. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was more dangerous than I realized. Not because of what I might do, but because of what we had already shared, the kind of connection that could never be undone.